Excel tips. My name is Neale Blackwood, and in this video we're going to look at 6 short macros that can save you some time and effort in Excel. You may have heard in social media that macros are dead. That's not quite true. Macros have been around for 30 years and many businesses use them to automate processes. One thing that has changed obviously is AI. So artificial intelligence systems are pretty good actually at writing macros. And so you can use them as your assistant. AI can help you write the code, it can help you edit the code, and it can also help you debug your code. So rather than being dead, I think macros are more accessible now with the advent of AI. Now, just some terminology. So macros are created using VBA code. So VBA stands for Visual Basic for Applications. The code is written in VBA and runs in the background and allows you to automate processes in Excel. This file that we're looking at is available on the INTHEBLACK website, so you can download the file and get all of the code. When you open the file, you might get this Enable Content button. So you need to make sure you click that so that you can use the macros within this file. So I'm going to do that now. And we're good to go. But before we dive in, there is a warning that comes with macros. Macros clear Excel's undo list. Now this means that whatever you do in the macro can't be undone, and anything you did before you ran the macro can't be undone either. So, typical thing that you do is you save the file, run your macro. If everything works, great. If it doesn't, then just close the file and don't save. Another option is to just use a copy of the file. That's the warning, so just be aware that macros do clear the undo list. And we do rely on undo quite a lot these days. Okay, so these are the 6 macros that we're going to look at. I've used 6 sheets to sort of demonstrate these. So if we click on this one, this is the first one. The other sheets aren't there because we're going to use this macro to actually unhide all of the sheets. To unhide sheets can take a few clicks. So this macro will unhide all of the sheets in the file in one click. So let's see how fast that is. There we go, done. So all of the sheets are now unhidden and we can go to them, which we will as we work our way through. But first, let's go through the macro. So to see where the macros are, you need to press Alt and the F11 function key. And that opens up the VBA window. And here are the macros that we're going to work through. So they are in this ShortMacros module. And I'll show you how you can use that a little bit later to copy the macros into what's called the Personal Macro Workbook, which is where you can sort of keep your general purpose macros. I'll explain that a little bit later. Okay, let's see how this code works. Note the green code doesn't do anything. They're just called comments. We're using what are called variables. And so I've got a WS variable and an SHT variable, so 2 variables. Dim is short for dimension, which is an old-fashioned programming term that got shortened to dim. So it's basically saying that we're going to use 2 variables. The first variable, SHT, is going to capture whatever the active sheet is. So Excel knows what sheet is active when the macro runs. It's best practice to return the user to the sheet they were on when they ran the macro. And the easy way to do that is to capture that sheet. So SHT now represents whatever the active sheet is when the macro is run. Then we're going to use a for each next loop. So this is a loop that keeps going. The WS variable represents each sheet as you work through all the sheets in the file. Then it's very simple to say ws.visible equals true, which is the command that makes the sheet visible. And that just loops through all of the worksheets in the file, even the hidden ones, and makes them visible. And then it finishes once all of the worksheets have been done, and then we can use that SHT variable again to activate whatever sheet was active when we first ran the macro. And that's how the macro works. So let's have a look at the next macro, which is the yesterday macro. Now, there is a keyboard shortcut in Excel. It's Ctrl and the semicolon, and that puts in today's date, so you can see when I'm recording the video. That's really useful. But I had the situation that I needed to enter yesterday's date quite often. And so rather than deducting 1 from today's date, I wrote a macro that does it. Now this macro that we can see the code on the screen, it uses an if statement to actually identify whether what I've got selected is a range. Now that's a really useful piece of code there, because you can identify if a user has selected a range before the macro is run. So in this case, if I don't have a range selected, and a range, by the way, can be a cell, if I don't have a range selected, the macro won't do anything. It will only populate the date if a range is selected. And the way it works is selection is a really powerful keyword in Excel. It's whatever you've got selected before the macros run. And so, for example, I could select that range, and then if I run the macro, that puts yesterday's date in all of those cells. But for example, I've got an image here. If I've got that image selected and then I click the button, nothing happens because I didn't have a range selected before the macro was run. Oh, by the way, the date -1 means take today's date and deduct 1 from it. Selection includes the whole area. So you may not know, but you can actually select one range and another range and another range, just hold in the Control key. And so if I click that again, it's going to populate all of those cells with, in this case, yesterday's date. So there was lots of times I needed to enter yesterday's date rather than today's date. And so I created the macro. Okay, now here's one that accountants love. It's the red brackets format. It's also the brackets format. What we've got here is no format at all. Here's an example of the red brackets. So you can see a negative is shown as red. Here's an example of the negative brackets, but it's still in black. Okay, the secret here is that the decimal place is lined up, which is the important thing to do. So let's have a look. So I can select that range. I can click this one. So there's actually 2 macros here. I've sort of cheated. Basically, the only thing that's different between these macros is the format that's used. One uses the red color here, and the other one doesn't have that. So it just uses the black color. The top macro will put just the normal brackets, and doesn't change the color, whereas the second macro will change the color to red as well as the brackets. So let's see the normal ones. So that's just the standard. It doesn't change the color, and this one here will change the color. And there we go. And again, the code there uses that same if statement to make sure you've got a range selected. And then again, that selection keyword, which is really, really useful. In this case, we're changing the number format, and we need to use the quotation marks around that format. You may have seen that type of format before. If you press Ctrl+1 and go custom, here are examples of those custom formats. So if we scroll right to the bottom, those ones that we've just put in are now listed. These are not default in Excel, so that's why you have to use a macro to put them in. But you need to enclose them in those quotation marks to get it to work. That's formatting. Power Query can do some amazing things, and I'm a big proponent of Power Query, and there's lots of Power Query articles on the INTHEBLACK website. But Power Query has an Achilles heel. It can't change the data where it is. Power Query can fix things like blank rows, missing values, and trimming, like removing excess spaces, things like that. So Power Query can do that really, really well. But Power Query has to create another data set to do the fixing. So if you've got, let's say, a table of 10,000 rows and it's got some issues that you need to fix, then you've got to create another table of 10,000 rows to fix it. Now, if the data's already in Excel, then it can be more efficient to use VBA because you can just change the data in situ. You're not having to create another data set. Here's some examples where VBA can change things in situ and not have to create another data set. Okay, so let's see how we can do this and fix the data where it is. So the first one we're going to look at is removing blank rows. So you'll notice here that I've got a few blank rows within this data. So what we can do, we select the data set. So over on the left-hand side, I've just got the numbers here just to show that it's only deleting the range. In here, it's not deleting the whole row. It's just deleting the range within this area. You'll notice there are numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are sequential, and there's the blank rows in between them. We should keep these sequential numbers, and all of the other blank rows should disappear. So here we go. And there we go. So you can see how quick it works. As I said, Power Query would have to create another data set to do that. Something else that you sometimes need to do is populate blanks with zeros. Excel unfortunately doesn't handle blank cells very well. Lots of Excel shortcuts don't work really well when there's blank cells involved. Also, you might have used a pivot table, and when you created your pivot table, it might have defaulted to counting rather than summing, and that's typically caused by blank cells in the value column. Pivot tables are a lot better now than they used to be, but that still can cause an issue. So what you can do is you can create a macro. Oh, I should have shown you just, sorry, I forgot to mention how that macro worked. 2 different variables. One of them is counting the rows. Now, when you're deleting rows in a range, you need to start at the bottom and work up. And so we can use what's called a for next loop, and it can go through the rows from the bottom up, if you like. Now, what we've got here is we've got a count of how many rows we need to look at. So, and that's captured in this rows count variable. We've used that type name again. This time, if it's not equal to a range, it's going to exit the sub. So exit sub means the macro stops. So if I haven't got a range selected, the macro is not going to do anything. Okay, and with the for next loop, the variable r equals how many rows we've got to 1, and we can step -1, which means we start at the bottom and we work our way up the list. And what we can do is use an if and a worksheet function of count A. So what we're going to do is we're going to count the entries in the row, and if it equals 0, we're going to delete the row. So that is the for next loop. So it starts at the bottom. When it finds a blank row, it deletes it, and then it works on the next row up. You can't start at the top when you're deleting because it just won't work, okay? So you need to start at the bottom, and that's what that code does. Okay, back to populating blanks. So this one here, again, uses that same piece of code to exit the sub if it's not a range. If it is a range, it's going to use the selection. So it's going to use the special cells command. Now that's got a lot of options that are really useful, and one of those is this type blanks option. So that will select all of the blanks in a range in one step, basically. And in this case, they're going to equal 0. So let's see how this works. I select the range. All of these blank cells should end up with 0 in them. There we go. So it's as simple as that. So it's a really quick fix. Next, we're going to look at, this time it's a for each loop on the selection. So this goes through every single cell in the range. So in this range, we've got some spaces on the left and spaces on the right. And what we want to do is remove all of those spaces. Sometimes when you import data from other systems, there are extra spaces thrown in either at the start or the end that affect how useful the data is. So Excel has a trim function, but so does VBA. And so this code uses the C variable. Again, it's got that type name selection there. If it's not a range, well, it just stops. And then we go for each C in selection. This is a really powerful piece of code. This will go through every single cell in the range selected. There is an option has formula, so we can identify whether there's a formula in this range. So some of these cells have formulas in them. They're not going to be changed. If it doesn't have a formula, it means it's a data entered value, and they're the ones that are going to be changed. And basically, the trim function removes leading and trailing spaces. I'm going to select the range and click on the button, and there we go. We've removed the leading and trailing spaces where the data is. So let's see how we can run these macros off an icon on the Quick Access Toolbar. At the moment, the macros are in. If we go and have a look at the VBA code. So these are all the macros in the ShortMacros. This is called a module. So this is in the background, if you like. And this is where we store, we can store macros. Now, I've also got the Personal Macro Workbook available. Now, when you record a macro, one of the options is to save it to the Personal Macro Workbook. That's it there. That's saved in a special place called the Excel Start folder. And all of the macros in the Personal Macro Workbook are available all of the time. So as soon as you open up Excel, this Personal Macro Workbook opens as well. So if you save this module to your Personal Macro Workbook, you can access them pretty much anytime, and you can put them on a button on your Quick Access Toolbar. Okay, so I'm going to open up this, and I'm going to drag the short macros to the modules. So if I open up there, you should see, so I should have... So I've got lots of macros, as you can see. The short macros is now right at the bottom. What I did, I just dragged it to the Personal Macro Workbook. If you don't have the Personal Macro Workbook, all you need to do is record a macro. You don't need to do anything in the macro. You just record the macro and save it to the Personal Macro Workbook, and then stop recording, and then basically save everything as you leave Excel, and that will create the Personal Macro Workbook. I can't really do that because I've got one, so you just look it up on the internet. It's very easy to create the Personal Macro Workbook, and Excel will then have it available. And then you just drag the module to the Personal Macro Workbook modules. These macros will be available for use. So let's minimize that. Now, I've already got lots of macros on here. Some of the macros that we've looked at are already here, but I will create a new icon. So what I'm going to do is right click on the Quick Access Toolbar, and I'm going to customize the Quick Access Toolbar. In the popular commands, click macros, and the ones here are the ones in this file. Now, unfortunately, with the ones in the file that we're looking at, you'll need to have the file open to run them. So we need to track them down inside the personal, which is always going to be open. So I need to scroll down. So I'll find one of the macros in the ShortMacros module. So here we go. So this one here is the yesterday one. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to add that, click add, and that puts it over here. You can change the icon. So if you click modify, I'll put the, let's go the information icon, so that's easier to spot. You can also modify this text. So you can just change that to yesterday. Click OK and OK again. And so there is the I. So if I select my range, I can just click that, and that will put, I need to open up there, and that puts today's date. So let's say I open up a new file, a blank file, and let's go back to this file. I'm going to close this file down now, and I won't save it. I should still be able to use this yesterday. So if I select the range, there we go, open it up, and there's today. So that is using the yesterday that I copied across to the Personal Macro Workbook. All of these other macros that I've got here are in the Personal Macro Workbook. These are the general purpose macros that are available all the time. If you check out the INTHEBLACK website and this article, so at the bottom of the article I've put links to some of the other macro articles that I've covered over the years, so you can check those out as well. As I mentioned, AI now gives you the ability to help you write code, edit code, and to debug code. Just be aware, just like any AI, you do need to test it. Sometimes it does hallucinate and it creates code that doesn't work, but as long as you test it, and again, always test it on dummy data or a copy of the live data, because the issues with no undo. So just remember that. So macros are alive and well. They can save you a lot of time and speed up your processes. These were all short macros. They weren't optimized for speed. So there is some code you can add to macros that makes them run faster if they are slow. All of the macros we ran today were all pretty quick, but they can run slow in certain situations. Also, I should mention that these macros were designed to run on unprotected worksheets. So if there was protection in place, these macros would generate an error. You can add error handling to your macro code as well, which again, AI can help you with. Okay, macros are still worthwhile learning, and they can help you automate tasks, and AI can help you write them. So I hope you found that useful. Thanks for watching.